Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. But today is Friday, the 2nd of September 2022, and these are the stories that we'll be discussing in detail during the course of the show. We'll begin, of course, with the latest situation as far as the floods is concerned, whether it be the assistance that is coming to the people in the stricken areas across Pakistan, in Sindh, in Balochistan, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and in Punjab. As far as Sindh is concerned, of course, Dadu is the worst affected of the areas. There are many villages that are now wiped out, and people are under duress, are in a lack of different facilities, and that is where the government and the NGOs and the army and the navy and the Pakistan Air Force come in, wherein they are working 24/7 in order to bring some kind of relief. Also at the United Nations headquarters in New York, Pakistan's ambassador Munir Akram reminds the international community that Pakistan's contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions is negligible, but that it is facing the deadliest consequences of the changes caused by those emissions. Talking of the United States of America, Jake Sullivan, who's part of the panel on South Asia, and of course the US security advisor as well, he has assured Islamabad that Washington will continue to stand by Pakistan during these tragic times. So have other countries that have stood by Pakistan and have continued to pour in aid for the people stricken by the floods, whether it be France, whether it be China, whether it be other important countries, whether it be United Kingdom with 15 million pounds, or whether it be other countries as well as Turkey and many more that are coming in with the necessary aid for the people. Pakistan has of course declared an emergency in the face of these floods. Our Prime Minister is in Gilgit-Baltistan as we speak. He has met the flood affectees of district Ghizar as well, and he has of course instructed that the people be compensated at the earliest by the end of this day for those who have been affected by these floods. This is going to be our first big, huge story of the day. Then we are going to talk about our Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Saab, who has said that the National Solar Energy Initiative is going to provide massive relief to the people and is going to save precious foreign exchange. We know the energy crisis that Pakistan is facing, and in the wake of this fact, solar and wind energy are two alternatives that are not only green energy but also extremely efficient for countries such as Pakistan, and this goes in the right direction as far as this government's initiative for installing solar energy and providing people with the solar energy is concerned. Then we'll be talking about Aung San Suu Kyi. Court in Myanmar has sentenced her to a further 3 years in prison on election fraud charges. Also, she has now been sentenced to 20 years in prison on 11 counts, with several charges still remaining. If she's convicted on all counts, she could be put into prison for around 200 years. This is going to be our last story. Let's begin, ladies and gentlemen, with our first and major segment, and that concerns the flood, the devastation caused by the floods, and the relief and rehabilitation that is not only coming from our armed forces, from our government, from our NGOs, but also from international donors. More in the following report.
Pakistan is facing a flood of biblical proportions, with large swaths of country inundated by water, and experts call it one of the worst humanitarian disasters the country ever suffered. Southern Pakistan is bracing for more flooding as water level in Dadu continued to rise, and death toll from devastating floods crossed 1,200 according to National Disaster Management Authority. Federal government, NDMA, armed forces and civil administration are carrying out rescue and relief operations in flood affected areas. At UN headquarters in New York, Pakistan Ambassador Munir Akram reminded the international community that Pakistan's contribution to global greenhouse gas emission is negligible, but it's facing deadliest consequences of the changes caused by those emissions. The Bonn-based think tank German Watch ranked Pakistan as the world's 8th most vulnerable country to climate change, and in March this year, a NASA study predicted that in the not too distant future, some Pakistan regions will simply become uninhabitable. Following Pakistan's endless string of devastating natural disasters, including floods, heat waves and forest fires, Climate Change Minister Rahman warned that Pakistan is currently at the epicenter of extreme weather frontline. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif visited Gilgit to review the ongoing rescue and relief efforts and losses caused by flood in the area. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has called for unity and brotherhood to deal with calamity of rains and floods in the country. According to ISPR, Pakistan Army is continuing its rescue and relief operations in the flood-ravaged areas of country. The devastating scenes and heartbreaking misery of masses exhibits what the climate crisis looked like at 1.2 degrees Celsius of global warming since industrialization.
Now, to discuss this very important issue, of course, it's an ongoing process. We've been joined by two guests, one in the studios and one online. In the studios, we've been joined by Durre Mahmood. She's a climate policy expert. Thank you very much, Durre Mahmood, to have joined us in the studios. And online, we've been joined by Syed Shahid Kazmi Saab. He's a country coordinator for Pakistan Humanitarian Forum. Kazmi Saab, thank you very much to have joined us.
Welcome, thank you.
Well, let's begin with you, Durre Mahmood. Durre Mahmood, when you look at climate change, and they say Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable countries, some say it's at 5th place, some say it's at 8th place. Nevertheless, as far as the carbon footprint from Pakistan is concerned, it is less than 1%, and this has recently also been said by the United States, and this has also been emphasized by Munir Akram at the United Nations in New York. Why is Pakistan one of the most vulnerable when it has the lowest carbon footprint?
Right. So first you need to understand that the climate change is a multifaceted, multidimensional sort of a phenomena which affects differently in different countries. So somebody is putting emissions out there in the developed world, but the brunt is being faced by the developing countries. Now, why is that so? When you talk about the geography of Pakistan, there's a diversity. That strip you see, so we have sea on our south, we have mountain, the Himalayan belt on the north, in between we have plateaus, different regions. So, you know, we don't have one strip. So when we talk about climate change, there's a variation, there's a temperature changes and there's a precipitation changes. So that is affecting our belt because in Sindh we're receiving more rainfall. There's an anomaly, there's change in rainfall pattern, the glaciers are melting, so that's a phenomena, right? So because of our geographical diversity, we are being faced.
But you know, when you talk of glaciers melting, the whole GLOF phenomenon, as we call it, thousands of glaciers are present in Pakistan, and if they all melt, God forbid, the devastation that could be caused. Why is it happening? I mean, this is something that people like me fail to understand when Pakistan is not doing as much as many countries in the West are concerned that are not confronted with such issues.
Right. So basically, you need to understand that due to the greenhouse gases emissions, which are your carbon dioxide and methane and other gases, the global temperature has changed. Okay. So right now we are sitting at 0.85 degrees Celsius, and if we continue putting the emissions out there, we are going to be reaching 2 degrees Celsius. So now, what actually happens when the temperature changes? There's warming. So our oceans are warmed. When oceans are warmed, there's more evaporation. More evaporation means you're playing with the whole hydrological cycle, all right? So that means, like in Karachi, let's say Karachi. Why is Karachi receiving more? We're now we're sitting in a oceanic belt where you see our Arabian Sea is pretty much more warmed. So there are vapors from the land and sea as well. So you can see the multitude effect, and that is causing frequent rainfall. So we did not face this sort of rainfall in past 4 decades.
But what about Balochistan? I understand that in Sindh also there has been unprecedented rainfall. What about Balochistan? Is the same phenomenon as Sindh, as in Karachi?
Yes, it's basically, you need to understand very simple. When you cause warming, right? Like Al Gore explained, there's warming. When there's warming, there's change in temperature and there's change in rainfall. And those changes are actually causing these extreme events.
Right.
Now, be they flood, be it heat waves, be it be it droughts. So all these things are related, and then obviously we are vulnerable because of other issues. We have poverty, like 39% of people are poor in this country. We have ineffective planning. We are building on the flood zones, you know, and those things pretty much cause disaster after disaster, which we call induced impact.
All right.
Which you see.
This is a very interesting point that I'm going to take with my second guest. Induced impact, Kazmi Saab. Did Pakistan foresee this induced impact due to poverty or due to bad planning or due to many houses or infrastructures on the flood zones or on the river belts? Did the people who, when they were constructing these houses or these hotels, did they know that one day this all could be washed away by a flood? And if so, do you feel that the future measures, now that reconstruction is going to occur, and whenever it does occur in all of these flood-stricken areas, that there will be a different procedure or maneuvering as far as the construction of houses or infrastructure is concerned?
Okay, thank you. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Okay. First of all, might be we need to look at the disaster management spectrum of the country. Probably typically in Pakistan, we were not having any disaster management institute. We were not having disaster management legislation, act, or policy. It all came in 2005. After 2005 earthquake was a wake-up call for the country to develop and establish the disaster management institutes. Then after the 2005 earthquake, we have now the Disaster Management Act, we have the Disaster Reduction Policy, we have Climate Change Policy, and number of more policies. And then there's a good implementation at all at different levels as well. If we see, before answering your question, might be we need to look, because this is very much linked with the institutes and the system, whatever we have in place right now.
Right.
When you see there was an earthquake, we were more focused, our disaster management policies and the disaster management actions were more focused toward the earthquakes. And then we have a super floods in 2010, and the floods was more riverine floods. And then we also received few of the floods in each year. Then the phenomena got changing day by day, and then now this time the flood, which is considered and has a more worse than 2010, and this time we have received the flash floods. So God forbid, I don't know, scientists can tell this more in a good way, but I'm afraid that this could be an annual event. And then because the climatic effect and the climate change, the way is disturbing the Pakistan is quite alarming. And if you see in the global world, there are challenges, there are issues in the entire nation on the subject of climate change. When it comes to the readiness, before, if we provide some sort of trainings, either the state institutes are doing, either the NGOs are doing, or the people do, but there is an indigenous knowledge of the communities, and that is something which is very strong. And the people in Pakistan, although called more resilient towards multiple things, multiple disasters, you can see in last few months we were facing the heat wave somewhere in the month of
But
March,
you know,
April.
to be very frank, Kazmi Saab, the heat wave or the resilience of people has been tested to a certain limit, and that these floods and the devastation that it has caused has gone beyond the limit of the perseverance of any normal person who has withstood these heat waves or even previous floods. Because as we speak, the water is still causing devastation in different parts of Sindh, in Dadu as well, in so many other parts of Pakistan. This said, what should be the maneuvering or the way the government or the agencies or the NGOs along with the people of Pakistan should move forward as far as preventing some things like this to happen? If you feel that this is an annual phenomenon, if this is going to happen every year, then we should be ready for this next year as well. What should be the processes that the government should put into place?
The first thing which I could say, and most of the experts are agreeing on this, the development we do have, the development policies we do have, they might be not sensitive towards these issues. So the first thing now for our planning commission, for the policy makers, is that they need to come up with the more climate sensitive or climate smart disaster risk management or climate smart development in the country. Like the infrastructure we are building on, the population living on the vulnerable areas, and if they are receiving the floods each year. So this is something which is, I hope, that will be coming out. Although we did not have yet the detailed assessment of the infrastructure what has been damaged. The government is planning on that part with the support of international partners. But I can tell you that this is not an easy thing. The devastation, the level of that is more high compared to. I can tell you the story and experience from the field. Right now I'm in Sindh, coordinating the flood response of international NGOs, national NGOs with the government of Pakistan, with the provincial government and with the United Nations. So we have seen a number of cases. We have seen the whole devastation. Like, for example, it's not only the people who are affected by floods and they are displaced from the homes, but also if you, I can tell you that if you wanted to travel from Karachi to Sakhar, so it is taking you more than 15 hours right now, and you cannot go from Karachi to Sakhar in 3-4 hours distance time. So our colleagues who want to go are going in the field, we are sending them to the Multan airport, and they are taking the road travel from Multan to Sakhar. So this is not only impacting something, but the economy as a whole. And coming back to the question, I think this is now a very alarming situation for us as a nation, first for the people, how we are learning from this, because disasters come and then they go, but they provide a lesson learned to the nation, to the government and state. So
But you
being
know,
the
you talk about lessons learned, Kazmi sir, but the fact remains, if this becomes an annual phenomenon, will the lessons learned be implemented as form of processes in order to prevent further disasters next year or the year after?
the one thing which I appreciate the government of Pakistan, they did from the day one, they are mobilizing the global community that this event, the flood event and this disaster in Pakistan is not because of Pakistan. And this is
of
not
course.
something which is in the boundaries or we are only responsible for this, but all the industrial states, the big countries who are contributing more towards green gas emissions, they are more responsible, and they appealed international world to come forward and support on this. But what we need to do, that is important. If next year same floods happens again, so the first thing is the policies. Our policies, institutional policies who are dealing with the public interest, who are dealing with the disaster risk management subject, are the departments who are dealing with the planning sides. They need to look at these options that either our people, our communities, like if you see a map of Pakistan, so you can see a lot of area, more than 60%, 70% is coming as a red, which is a flood affected. And thanks to God, our northern areas region like AJK and GB, which were receiving every year more floods, but this time they didn't, but the floods came to this south region. So I think that strong disaster management policies, and they must be climate change informed policies. A standalone disaster risk management will never work, but when the things are coming and moving up rapidly, and as I mentioned earlier, this is something where the global community need to do something, and the global community and the scientific or expert institutes around the world, they should come forward and they should support the government of Pakistan, people of Pakistan at this time, not only by providing aid and relief, but
also by reducing the carbon emissions in respective countries, because Pakistan bears the brunt of it indirectly or directly when the carbon emission from these countries increases.
Exactly in their own countries, but at the same time they should come forward to support in the rehabilitation development, and also to support our governments in planning future scenarios, that how our policies and implementation will be risk informed and will be more people are climate sensitive.
All right. Speaking of climate sensitivity, Durre Mahmood, as Kazmi Sahab pointed out, that this is a phenomenon that we could unfortunately see every year now, and you also said this in the very beginning of the show when I started my discussion with you, that this is because of the increase in temperatures, and this is a phenomenon that is normal, that is natural. That if it's a natural occurring phenomenon, then we should expect it next year as well. I don't know whether it be with the same ferocity or not, but it's something like this might happen. Can Pakistan mitigate such effects of climate change on its own?
Pakistan cannot mitigate the effects on its own. That's why we need the international support, because like Shahid Saab agreed that we need to have an infrastructure in place, and without infrastructure we cannot move forward. Now, when he missed a very important point, that's preparedness. So see, when I say that the climate change is a meteorological phenomena, it's a hydrological phenomena. We do not have hydrological models at the moment. We do have a Met department, but the capacity needs to be strengthened. We need to look into the South Asian countries, our neighbors only. They have like live dashboard system. I've been to Kathmandu, I've been to India. They're monitoring it all, be it glaciers, be it like their sea levels, be it rainfall patterns, and that sort of modeling can actually help us reduce the impact in terms of life loss. These 1,700 deaths could have been saved if the rainfall patterns were monitored and they were evacuated earlier. Now, I have spoken to the people in the field, and they're saying it's very hard to actually evacuate people from their home. It's hard to convince them that something is coming. Now, people have mobile phones. The South Asian telecommunication report says that Pakistani people do not have food to eat, but they have smartphones. So now we need to send them alerts. Every person has to have those application. People in Karachi now, like, see, this city has more education rate than all, more literacy rate. Now, even if they're drizzling, people are not going to come out. They're mentally prepared. So they're doing something on their own capacity. Though it's an urban flooding, it's totally a different phenomenon altogether. It's nothing to do with the climate change because the drainage system is clogged. But do you see the sort of preparedness that people have? They're mentally prepared. So we need to do that even at the grassroots level, even within our communities. Like we're in the districts of Dadu, Shujawal, all those areas which are being affected right now from these calamities.
What about Balochistan? How can we, tell the people or convince them in order to rehabilitate themselves in other places? Because there are scores of people who've lived there from generations, and I've talked to many of the experts in my previous shows as well, and they said a lot of people show apprehension despite the fact that they've lost everything. They do not want to leave the lands where they have been living for decades. How can they be convinced? Can the government come up with some kind of a strategic planning for rehabilitating these people in infrastructures that could be flood not friendly but flood proof?
Yes, so flood prone is again another phenomena. Mitigation needs a lot of investment though, adaptation too, but mitigation, like Shahid said, that that needs an infrastructure development. So when you talk about preventing floods, then you should know that what sort of safe and smart housing is going to be there, with obviously there's going to be material that's going to be flood friendly, like wooden, like in a lot of countries of the world, you see they're living in those islands and they're safe, right? And they pretty much, some of them are even living in the water, but that requires a lot of investment, and that again we need to rely on the international finance, the private sector finance. Those things should be mobilized. Talking about it, the big funds out there, like Green Climate Fund is a big facility right now. But Pakistan is not even tapping. We have 3 to 4 institutions which are right now accredited to the GCF, which is National Rural Support Program, or perhaps JS Bank. But we need to get more of these CSOs and NGOs to the accreditation process so that they could get those grants and they could work in Balochistan, especially when you're talking about Balochistan. The province has a dynamics where international organization would be they have mobility issues, but the local NGOs like Balochistan Rural Support Programs, those need to be accredited. True. And they could do a lot on the community.
They could work in tandem with these international NGOs, and they could do the work over there with the help and assistance of the international NGOs. Speaking of this, Sharif Rahman Sahiba said that 70% of districts in the country are now underwater. All right. She also says that a third of Pakistan, an area roughly the size of the United Kingdom, is inundated. I mean, this is not a small area that is inundated. It will take some time for the water to move out of it or be absorbed by the earth or move ultimately into the Arabian Sea. But what measures, in your point of view, could be taken in the short term? For example, if, as Shahid Saab says, there are going to be rains or excess of rains next year at the same time as well, can some measures be taken in the short term that for example in the next 9 months some kind of structure could be put into place in the vulnerable provinces or the areas?
So there needs to be temporary relocation for the moment, because within the floods we all know that there are going to be waterborne diseases, the vector-borne diseases like dengue and other things. That's very
cholera's outbreak is already there in some of the areas.
Exactly. And then right now we have 183 basic health units in Sindh. In Balochistan it's even bad. So we need to have a temporary shelter at the moment, and people need to be relocated to a less or flood prone zones out in the country, and we do have many. So that could just pretty much save us from more life loss, damage in livestock, because that's the key that we need to save. When in case of calamity, we ask people to mobilize with their livestock and themselves. That's one thing. And then, like Shahid said, that international assistance could actually help us set these temporary shelters, which again are flood proof, because like he said, that we don't know, there could be more floods, but then those flood proof systems, the temporary shelters could be built in a smart way that it could cater to the families. The plinths could be raised. There are different models. The civil engineers are working on the climate smart buildings, those sort of things. And there are discussions I see on the PTV that build vertically and things like that. So we need to take into some building codes in consideration moving forward.
Or let's say Shahid Kazmi Sahab, coming to you and the Humanitarian Aid that is pouring in from a lot of the countries like Qatar, like Turkey, like France, like the United Kingdom, like Saudi Arabia, like Bahrain, like the United Arab Emirates, and many donor agencies as well, and the Asian Development Bank, and WHO, and the United Nations as well. There was, of course, a pledge of $160 million by the United Nations very recently, where our foreign minister was also there. He also showed many of the ambassadors very recently, all the stricken areas. In all of this process, how should the aid or the process of rehabilitation be streamlined in different provinces of Pakistan? What, in your point of view, needs to be the mechanism to be put into place?
Before that, I would say in Pakistan, specifically the climate change minister, I have seen she is advocating very strongly the case of Pakistan at the global level. And I think Pakistan must take a strong case to access the climate adaptation fund with the global community. Pakistan, what should be done, and the cost which we are estimating for the reconstruction and rehabilitation is more higher than the cost we spent or we were needing in 2010 floods. So what we need to do, we need to back up our mitigation adaptation strategy with the financial resources.
We are talking of $10 billion US. Is $10 billion US enough, Kazmi Saab, or will we be needing much more in the days to come?
I do not see, I cannot estimate honestly the exact figure, because in the absence of a study or the research, you can say need assessment, I'm sure that government of Pakistan, with the support of international institutions like World Bank, Asian Development Bank, is planning to conduct a detailed need assessment and damage assessment of the affected districts. So you can see almost, as you mentioned right now, the 80% or more than 60% of the area of Pakistan is affected already. So it will take a lot of time. But as far as this is concerned, I do not think that it will be completed in a year time. It will definitely complete a lot of time. And specifically when you are shortage, you do not have the enough resources, and you already have the many other problems, many other economic issues as well. One subject and one area where usually I see people talk less, which is most important, you can see the education system. Like the education has been disturbed badly, and the children who are out of school right now and they are out of their homes, how you can see those children.
But our Prime Minister, as of recently, has also directed the Higher Education Commission and the Ministry to prepare special packages for students of the flood-hit areas as well. So that is an initiative in the right direction as well, as far as education is concerned. You were talking about that.
Many sectors has been prioritized, including education, and I have seen while working with the provincial government here, the education sector itself is being prioritized, and I hope that government will be allocating some of the resources for education as well, which is most important. The first thing might be the infrastructure rehabilitation or reconstruction will take some time, but the schools and at least restarting the schools and classes will be one of the biggest challenges.
But Kazmi Saab, education, then health, maternal health, child health, there are so many avenues that the government will need to, really invest into in the coming weeks and months. And it really needs the help of all the donor agencies, of all the important countries that could help it. Because come as it may, the fact that whatever Pakistan is confronted with, irrespective of the economic situation, is not Pakistan's fault in reality, is it?
That's why we are educating the global community, and we are considering it's a global challenge or global disaster, because Pakistan has already educated on different forums during the United Nations flash appeal, in the bilateral meetings, in the, you can say, electronic media, global media, everywhere. We are sending message, you are sending message, our government is sending message to the entire community that this is something which is not a Pakistan specific disaster. This is a climate catastrophe, and here we are requesting, we are appealing to the international community to come forward and support, because if we are facing this today, somebody else will be facing this tomorrow. And we all know and we believe that climate change doesn't have any boundaries. So the strongest point with all of us through our electronic channels, through the state channels, through the government, NGOs, and the other activists and the social media influencers, everybody, this is very important that we should talk more about the climate change. We should convince more the global community. We should mobilize them, and there are very good examples of the assistance and support coming up from the global community. And as you've seen, now with the time passes, I have seen very positive news coming from the West, coming from the many countries, that the global community and the global governments, at least, they are now realizing, accepting this as a global challenge. So that is something which will help us to build back better. That is something which will help us to reconstruct, to rehabilitate our affected population, our infrastructure, and the things that we have lost. But which is more important, which something is needed, that is a will. That is again, we need to act. There is something needed, that the whole nation, we need to come up, and we need to act like a nation, and we need to think on this, and we need to work together, and must support to the people and who have lost their homes, who have lost their everything. Honestly speaking, I can tell you hundreds of the stories which are even being projected on the international media, where these devastation had clearly messed up the lives of the people. For example, if someone lost their home, if someone lost his home the day before, if there was a home, and now they are living outside the home and living in a tent, you can imagine that how that life is.
All right, Shahid, Kazmi sir, also the fact remains that a lot of crops have been wasted. We are an agricultural country. We rely on agriculture produce, and the loss of around 45% of the country's cropland also gives rise to a lot of issues as far as the availability of vegetables or fruits across the country, and the export of these from Pakistan to other countries is concerned. Is there some kind of maybe mechanism to avoid the loss of crops in the future?
Again, before that, we need to know that a majority of the population living in the areas Balochistan, South Punjab and Sindh, their source of livelihood, their source of income is their lands. So whatever they earn,
or their animals,
and the livestock, specifically in the Balochistan, and you can see that has been washed away. So this is not only a challenge of the immediate humanitarian assistance or the needs, but we are fulfilling right now, and many actors are working on that. But there is a strong policy, or you can say a lot of support and mobilization needed for the communities and people, that they can build back better. So building back better doesn't only require a home. You are living in a good home, a roofed home, but now you are living in a tent, or might be keeping in view the future sensitivity, you are reconstructing a shelter or something, but that family requires the same support what they were having, in terms of they were having the livestock, they were having their small shops, small businesses, and then those farmers and those communities who are working in the fields, and you can see that has been lost badly. And I can see there is no any estimated, you can say not an evident estimation, any estimation based on a need assessment, but government and UN has reported that the livestock itself, and then these crops, and then converting this into more poverty, will increase more nutrition challenges, which are already too much high in this country.
What kind of alternatives do the people who have been affected have at this point of view, and how can the government or the agencies help them get back on their own 2 feet economically?
I think it requires a lot of attention to details. Attention to details mean when we know we are living in a disaster-prone area, we were receiving floods almost every year, small floods, although riverine floods. But now we have seen we are receiving the flash floods as well. When we know that our areas, a lot of our, we are receiving different weathers in a year, like the climate catastrophe in Pakistan, you have seen the heat waves, you have seen the extreme weathers, like last 2 years, we are observing and receiving the climate winter emergencies as well. In some part of the countries, the level, the snow falling and the infrastructure damage and road blockages is more higher than before. So one evidence now, until now in Pakistan, is clearly established that we are badly affected by the climate change. So years ago or months ago, we were believing on the list that we are in the top 10 of top 10 countries in the world, in the list of the top 10 countries who are exposed to climate change, are most vulnerable. But now, after this evidence, I believe that every one of us is clear. So what needed is definitely the state and the government is responsible, and government have to guide us, government have to guide communities, government have to guide people, government have to develop international relations, government have to take support from the international community and whatever. So my recommendation or my expectation is that we need to look at our development policies. We need to see that our development policies, if we are going for the similar development policies in the future, that if they are not climate sensitive, if they are not informed with the evidences and research based, and we are going to construct a similar infrastructure again and again on these vulnerable areas, so God forbid we will be receiving the same thing. But I think hope is very important, and we cannot say that something is coming in and we are hopeless. We are a resilient nation. We have fight in the past. You have seen to many issues. We did fight with the COVID as well, and within a very limited resources in the country. So our example among the few nations, and this is not only a phenomena, but this is reality that Pakistanis are resilient. And another important thing which I see, the Pakistani diaspora around the world, the philanthropy within the country and outside the Pakistanis, the way they are supporting.
It's exemplary as far as Pakistan is concerned, and I think this is an example that many other countries could follow maybe in due time. We've seen our EDs, we've seen so many others like ED Saab who have contributed so much to our society, who have helped so many people who are in need. And I think it is in these times of needs that the philanthropic spirit of Pakistan wakes up and people rise up to the occasion, and we've seen so many people helping, even people from their personal capacity across Pakistan have been helping those in need by collecting food items, by collecting
across the globe,
clothes, by collecting water, and so on and so forth. And I think this is a very good initiative, and it shows that we haven't lost our humanity as of yet. This is extremely important and a test for Pakistan as well. This is what I feel. But as far as humanity is concerned, do you feel this is also what is happening in Pakistan is also a test for other countries in the region or for other countries in the West, that they could follow suit with situations such as what Pakistan is confronted with right now?
Exactly, that is the message. What I'm since the start of the program, I'm conveying you and I'm telling you that this is the right thing. And I believe the level of the, as far as I'm observing the global medias, I have seen there's a lot of projection about Pakistan case this time in the global media. I have seen international organization, international NGOs, United Nations agencies, their headquarters, they are equally focusing, and they are giving a lot of attention to this, and everybody understands that it's a climate catastrophe. And then again, I would like to appreciate Sherry Rahman, who is advocating strongly. She is advocating strongly the Pakistan case in front of the world, that this is a climate catastrophe, and I hope that world will be able to understand this. And as I mentioned earlier, like not only Pakistan, if you see the climate vulnerable countries in the list, global list, a lot of Asian countries are part of that. So this is not only Pakistan, might be our different neighboring
Any other
countries.
country could be next. Any other country could be next, and this is a warning sign, as Antonio Guterres has also said when he addressed through the United Nations portal. Finally, Durre Mahmood, when you look at climate change, of course, Pakistan is the most vulnerable, was in the top 10, and I think now it's in the top 5, the way these floods have affected Pakistan. We don't know what is in store for Pakistan in the coming years as well. Being a climate change resilient or climate change proof is not something that happens in a day or in a week or maybe in a year. But if one had to prioritize measures to be taken, what should they be?
So basically, when we talk about the economic sector, I think when we build back agriculture, like you guys spoke, so now we need to have a climate programming or climate integration. So there has to be climate smart agriculture. All over the world, it's happening. There's vertical farming, you know, all the sort of things. I spoke about remote sensing and drones and all those sort of things. We need to bring back that equipment, and we can pretty much borrow it from our neighbor. That sort of technical assistance is very well in the neighboring country. So that's, like you said in the beginning, as an agroeconomy, like we have to build back. So agriculture is the backbone. That's number one. Number two, the health system. The health system has to do a lot in the preparedness. So there has to be a lot of advocacy in the health system, in the health institutes, the basic health unit. They should be disaster prepared with the climate integration, and climate smart disaster management has to be something in the health system. So that's two. And the third is in planning and development of infrastructure that has this, it's actually number one, has to be very climate smart and flood proof, because that what you saw, that the 1,700 deaths were mostly because of the infrastructure losses, and that needs to be built very smartly.
A lot of things need to be thought about so that Pakistan could be prepared for any such future challenges. And I hope that Pakistan, of course, it is doing its needful, but when it comes to the relief and rehabilitation part and the rebuilding part, I hope that all the agencies, all the important organizations that understand how to build climate resilient areas and how to help people to affront or confront climate change in the future as well, will be there standing side by side by Pakistan to help them come out of this devastation, this crisis that Pakistan is engulfed in. Thank you very much, Durre Mahmood, and online. Thank you very much, Syed, Shahid, Kazmi Saab, to have joined us. I think it was a very important discussion, and from two different angles, that is from a climate change angle and from a humanitarian angle. Pakistan is doing whatever it can. So are our armed forces, so are the donor agencies, so are some of the countries that are now slowly and steadily pouring in help for Pakistan. What we need is a collective effort. What we need is Pakistan also to be as one in order to stand up for our country, to stand up for those people who are in need. Only then can we make that right change in the right time. Coming to our last two stories, ladies and gentlemen, the first concerns the National Solar Energy Initiative, which will provide massive relief to the people. This has been stated by the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Saab. He said this in a tweet that as a plan to generate 10,000 megawatts solar energy, the government now has decided to call pre-bid conference of all stakeholders next week. He has said that power plants operating on diesel, coal and furnace oil will now be partially replaced. He also said a major chunk of electricity is produced from imported fuel, whose prices have gone up in recent months. So of course, relying on alternative and green energy sources such as solar energy is a right step in the right direction at the right time. And let's hope this gets implemented in due time, because Pakistan really needs this, and we laud the Prime Minister and the government for the initiative that has now been finally put into place. And I hope more and more people will take on to solar energy or even wind energy in the long term. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, from the international front, we have Aung San Suu Kyi. Let's go to Myanmar. And in Myanmar, a military court has sentenced Aung San Suu Kyi to a further 3 years in prison on election fraud charges. This has been confirmed. This brings now the sentence to Aung San Suu Kyi to 20 years in prison on 11 counts. Several charges are remaining. If all the charges that she is confronted with, she is convicted on them, she might get around 200 years of imprisonment. The new sentence, of course, also includes a hard labor. The 77-year-old Nobel laureate has spent most of her time in detention under house arrest in the capital, Naypyidaw. Of course, these hearings were closed-door hearings, and there has been some form of criticism on them as well. Nevertheless, this is the latest as far as Aung San Suu Kyi is concerned. 20 years in prison now, and it could increase up to 200 years. Let's see what is in store for Aung San Suu Kyi. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. It's the last day of the week. We'll be seeing you, inshallah ta'ala, on Monday. Stay safe. Be helpful to all those around you, to all those who come to you for help, but of course confirm whether they are the right sources. Do give to the Prime Minister's fund. Do give to the army as well, that are on the front line as far as helping those in need is concerned. As far as donating 10 rupees, it's not a big thing. Just text fund to 9999 and the 10 rupees will be deducted from your SMS, from of course your respective account. Do that. Be some kind of help to those in need. A small or a big help, these people need it. Think of it and do the needful. Allah Hafiz. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday.